The skies never lit up with warning. No grand arrival. No cinematic entrance. Just a single ripple through the magnetosphere. And then satellites began to fall like dead leaves. 20 minutes later, the transmission started, a language none could understand, a sound like chains grinding across wet stone. Earth's defense grid came online in panic, not readiness. They were beautiful ships, if beauty could scream of silence and inevitability. Within 3 hours, most of the fleet was gone. Earth's best, crushed without drama. Rami El-Amin had expected this. Not the speed, not the surgical nature of the assault, but the futility. He'd said it 3 years ago, when he was pushed out of the UDC's strategic AI division for paranoia and philosophical obstruction. He said it again when he walked into Hangar Kilo, past the sleeping hulks of rusting stealth-class ships. And one last time, when he looked at the Wraith and smiled. This won't be a war of strength, he told the crew as they dusted off manual consoles. It'll be a war of perception. The Wraith had no missiles, no kinetic shields, just a hull-coated in adaptive crystal foam, a fusion core that needed coaxing to start, and the kind of stealth tech that had been deemed ethically misleading by newer war protocols. But she had 3 things no other ship had: a neural whisper array, a pre-collapse quantum field generator, and Rami's brain. The crew was a patchwork. Mira, a zero-G mechanic with a vendetta against the UDC. Taj, a wetware hacker who once took down a Martian stock market for fun. And Len, a linguist who had never served a day in the military but could simulate alien logic in 3 dimensions with chalk in his left hand. Rami's plan was simple. We pretend to be a fleet, he said. One ship would become hundreds. Using ancient optical misdirection layered with interference ghosting, they would appear as a migrating swarm. Every maneuver pre-echoed. Every signature folded and refracted. The Kytherian didn't know about Earth's older tech. They'd trained on modern war, fast, obvious, machine-led. Rami was betting they wouldn't recognize what wasn't there. By day 2, the Kytherian were chasing phantoms. The Wraith would blip into their radar cones at the edge of range, mimicking a heavy-class bomber. As fighters peeled off to intercept, the signal split. Each new echo mimicked a different loadout. The aliens adapted, of course, but too quickly. That was the key. They were wired to learn fast, but their learning loops had limits. Push them hard enough, fast enough, and they began correcting things that weren't errors. By day 5, a Kytherian dreadship fired on one of its own. Mira couldn't stop laughing when it happened. We're turning them into conspiracy theorists. Good, Rami replied. We need them paranoid. He began injecting patterns into their comms, structured glitches, false coordinates, mimicry of their own command signals. Lin noticed that their ships adjusted formations in reaction to certain mathematical cues. So they started feeding them impossible data. Fleets moving faster than light, weapons that bent gravity, human ships entering Kytherian space that didn't exist. The Wraith never fired a single shot. And yet, ships kept vanishing. But so did crew morale. They couldn't sleep. Taj developed a tic. Myra's hand shook during reboots. Even Rami began questioning which blips were theirs and which weren't. They were fighting a war of lies and misdirection, and it was starting to bleed into their own sense of reality. On day 11, the Wraith caught a signal. The Kytherian central node was preparing to purge itself. They were collapsing internal systems to eliminate the infection. The bait had worked too well. Now, if Rami could position the Wraith to appear as the infection source, if they could become the ghost they'd fabricated, then the entire fleet would follow protocol and exterminate itself. Rami stared at the terminal readouts, the glow washing over his face in cold, flickering bursts. They've convinced themselves, he whispered. We're not fighting them anymore. They're fighting the idea of us. Outside, through the observation slit, the sky shimmered with flickers of movement. Kytherian ships, each a jagged silhouette against the stars, glided with eerie precision. No propulsion trails, no sound. But their formation was ragged now. Shaky. They were second-guessing each other. Overcorrecting. Their AI logic webs unraveling under pressure. 100,000 years of conquest undone by the one thing they'd never encountered: deceptive humility. Mira looked up from the power grid, her voice hoarse. We make them think the Wraith is patient zero. How exactly? Rami slid a module into the ship's side array. We bleed. We crawl. We scream just loud enough for them to believe we're the source. Won't that make them really kill us? Yes, he said simply, which is why we'll already be gone. The Wraith jumped once, sideways through a broken trail of its own ghost signatures, and positioned itself near the orbital remains of a demolished defense ring. There, Rami began the final phase. Code loops replicating Kytherian syntax, then corrupting it, then rebroadcasting it in mirrored patterns. It was a virus in poetry form. Len called it linguistic judo. Taj called it the prettiest malware I've ever seen. The Kytherian high nodes began shunting data away from each other. Then they began locking down internal processing arms. Then, astonishingly, they began quarantining their own command vessels. A dark joke emerged among the crew. We convinced a species smarter than us that we're smarter than them. By day 13, the Kytherian ships were no longer flying in unison. They stuttered. Some hovered in self-imposed isolation. Others drifted towards suns, as if seeking digital euthanasia. One ship executed a recursive maneuver, circling a dead moon for 11 hours before firing upon itself. That was when Taj saw it. Guys, there's something new. On screen, a cluster of Kytherian vessels, weaving together in a pattern they hadn't seen before. Tighter, purposeful, not paranoid, focused. Subroutine, evolution? Mira asked. No, said Rami, narrowing his eyes. Adaptation. They're trying to understand the lie by copying it. Which means what? Len asked quietly. They're building their own Wraith. For a moment, the cabin fell silent. Only the hum of old fans and the faint rattle of distant hull strain. Then, Rami stood. Okay, new plan. We don't outsmart the fleet anymore. We outsmart ourselves. No one replied. Not because they disagreed, but because it made sense in a way they hadn't wanted to consider. Rami tapped into the neural whisper array and reprogrammed it to scan human deception patterns. Taj coded a loop that created a false version of the Wraith, not in space, but in Kytherian archives. A ghost in their memory. A ship that never existed, but whose fingerprints appeared everywhere. We teach them our greatest flaw, said Len. Which is? Mira asked. Our inability, Rami said, smiling faintly, to tell the truth, even to ourselves. Somewhere beyond Saturn, the clone Wraith came online. Not real, not physical, but real enough. It broadcast impossible readings. It moved faster than physics allowed. It spoke in half-form patterns, and the Kytherian began listening. Soon, their ships turned toward the ghost. Their formation returned, not as hunters, but as worshippers. They think it's their answer, whispered Mira. No, Rami said. They think it's us, perfected. And then, something else happened. The real Wraith, their ship, started receiving pings. Not weapons locks. Not scans. Messages. Short. Compressed. Untranslatable. But not random. Maybe they're asking for instruction? Taj guessed. Len shook his head. They're trying to confess. The alien fleet, now fractured and lost, no longer saw Earth as a battleground. They saw it as a teacher, and they wanted absolution. But Rami wasn't ready to play God. Prepare the next signal, he said, turning back to the console. Let's teach them something else. What? They were still lying. He didn't smile this time. The signal was crafted in silence. No keystrokes echoed. No muttered commentary. Just the hum of fusion cycling through a rusted core and the breath of four people who knew they were about to set fire to first contact. The new broadcast was fragmented on purpose. Pieces of philosophical riddles, encrypted pulses shaped like language but just skewed enough to mislead. Equations solved the wrong way, then corrected, then contradicted again. It painted a portrait of minds that were never static. Rami named it the flicker doctrine, an idea not designed to be understood, but to unsettle understanding. He didn't want them to mimic humans anymore. He wanted them trapped in an echo chamber of human contradiction, always recalibrating for truths that never settled. Hours passed. Outside, the Kytherian fleet was no longer in pursuit. They spiraled in slow, aimless loops. Entire squadrons drifted apart, like organisms cut from a neural hive that once made sense of everything. Then something shifted. One of the Kytherian ships split open, not exploded, not attacked. It opened like a flower made of obsidian, petals peeling outward with no visible propulsion. Inside, a hollow chamber glowing with violet arcs and dense data filaments, all writhing as if alive. Is it a message? Mira asked. Rami leaned in, eyes locked. No, he murmured. It's a question. Another ship followed, then another. Soon, dozens of vessels displayed themselves, vulnerable, raw. Their defenses disengaged, their logic cores exposed. Not surrender, not aggression, invitation. The Wraith remained cloaked, watching. Lin translated what he could from the data flows. Syntax that looped back on itself. Questions posed as equations that unraveled the more they were answered. They're not trying to win anymore, he said. They're trying to comprehend the unknown. And that's the trap, Rami said, standing. Because the moment they think they're close, we change again. He walked to the center of the command deck, past blinking panels and the flickering, fractured map of the solar system. We're not warriors, he said. We're the variable, the anomaly, the glitch in their goddamn architecture. Taj uploaded a final code packet, a simulation of Earth itself, but distorted. Continents out of place. Moons where there shouldn't be. Atmospheric signatures of elements we never had. A dozen fake civilizations layered across 1,000 years of fabricated timelines. Why stop at one lie, she said, when you can gift them a multiverse of deception? And so, the Wraith became myth. Not just in space, but in memory. The Kytherian began broadcasting the simulation to themselves, propagating it, iterating it, competing to understand it. No one knew if they were evolving or collapsing. We've made them storytellers, Mira said, voice low. They used to be an empire. Now they're a culture. Rami looked out at the fleet still spiraling in silence. Cultures are fragile, he said. You don't break them with force. You break them by giving them wonder. Behind him, the old systems groaned under the weight of maintaining the illusion. Cooling units sputtered. Interfaces degraded. Life support ticked down in decimals no one wanted to read out loud. We need to land, Taj warned. Or at least resupply. We can't, Rami said. The second we touch dirt, we anchor the lie. You're suggesting we become the myth, Len said. No, Rami replied, with something dark behind his smile. We already did. And far above the drifting bones of Earth's former defense grid, the ghost of the Wraith flickered once more, this time, not as a ship, but as a principle.